I'm Emily, and this is my story, the one that nearly tore my life apart. It's strange how things can spiral out of control when you least expect it, how someone you trust can suddenly feel like a complete stranger. It all started so innocently. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 8 years. We had built a beautiful life together, a charming home filled with warm memories, fulfilling careers that gave us purpose, and an energetic golden retriever named Cooper, who was like a child to us. From the outside, everything seemed picture perfect. But the cracks had begun to form long before I ever noticed them. Daniel's career as an architect consumed him. He was brilliant at what he did, pouring his soul into designing structures that would stand the test of time. Unfortunately, our marriage wasn't one of them. His late nights at the office turned into early mornings, and weekends became an extension of his work week. At first, I understood it was his passion, and I admired his dedication. But admiration gradually turned into frustration, and frustration into loneliness. At dinner, he was present physically but absent mentally, his eyes scanning emails on his phone as he muttered half-hearted responses to my attempts at conversation. I started keeping track of the number of times he actually looked me in the eyes during a meal. Some nights, the answer was 0. I felt like a ghost in my own home, that I was missing. But the truth is, loneliness doesn't announce itself with grand gestures. It seeps in quietly, unnoticed at first, until one day you wake up and realize you've been carrying its weight for far too long. And then there was Alex. It wasn't as if I had been searching for something or someone, but sometimes life has a way of presenting you with exactly what you think you need at precisely the wrong moment. Alex worked at the same marketing firm as me, though we rarely interacted beyond professional pleasantries. That changed one evening when we were both stuck late at the office, the city lights flickering through the windows as we wrapped up a campaign proposal. "Long night?" he asked, stretching in his chair. I nodded, offering a tired smile. "Seems like every night is a long night these days." He studied me for a moment before speaking. "You okay?" It was such a simple question, yet it hit me like a freight train. When was the last time someone had asked me that? When was the last time I had answered honestly? I hesitated, then shrugged. "Just tired." He didn't pry, but there was something in his expression, concern, understanding, that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. We ended up talking longer than we should have, the conversation flowing effortlessly from work to books, to music, to dreams we had once had but had long since shelved in favor of responsibility. It was innocent, at least. That's what I told myself. But deep down I knew the cracks were no longer just cracks. They were widening, and I was standing on the edge, staring into the abyss. Daniel had a friend named Alex. They played basketball together on the weekends, and he came to our house often. He was charming, easygoing, and had a natural ability to make people laugh. Whenever he walked into a room, he was naturally warm and made everyone feel comfortable. The three of us often had meals together, talking about everything from work to travel to the absurdity of reality TV. Our conversations were fun, full of jokes and teasing. But over time, something changed. At first, I didn't notice. Or maybe I did, but I chose to ignore it. It started with the little things, the way Alex listened to me, really listened, with an intensity that made me feel heard in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. The way he laughed at my jokes, like they were actually funny, not just out of habit or politeness. The way he looked at me, just a second longer, as if searching for something unsaid. I told myself it was nothing, just friendship. Just the natural comfort of two people who had known each other for years. But the anticipation I felt before he arrived, the way my heart raced when he walked into the room, The way I found myself dressing a little more formally on nights I knew he was coming, those told a different story. The conversation with Alex began to move into new territory. We talked about childhood memories, about dreams we had once had but had put on hold. He asked me about my favorite books, music that made me feel something, little details of my day that Daniel no longer seemed to notice. When I mentioned a new pair of earrings, Alex was the first to notice them, complimenting how well they caught the light. When I sighed tiredly after a long day, he was the one to ask if I was okay. It felt good. So good. I told myself it was harmless, just a connection between two people who understood each other. But late at night, as Daniel slept next to me, I found myself thinking of Alex, of the way his voice softened when he spoke to me, of the way his eyes held a quiet question that I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. And in the silence of those moments, I knew something was changing, something I wasn't sure I could stop. Then one evening, everything changed. It was a Friday night, the kind of night that should have been normal, unremarkable. Daniel was stuck late at work again, as he often was these days, and I had to settle for a quiet evening alone. But then Alex offered to stop by and help fix a stubborn kitchen cabinet that had been broken for weeks. I hesitated before agreeing. It wasn't that I didn't want to see him, I did. Maybe more than I wanted to. And that should have been my first warning. Cooper, who always greeted me with excitement, nearly knocked Alex over when he arrived. His laugh was warm, comforting, the kind that sank into my bones in a way I hadn't realized I'd missed. He knelt down to scratch Cooper behind the ears, stroking his fur with a familiarity that made something in my chest tighten. This was normal. This was safe. Or at least it was supposed to be. But there was something different in the air that night. An energy I couldn't name. It was the way Alex looked at me for a second longer, the way he touched my hand as he handed me the screwdriver. A fleeting touch, harmless to anyone else, but it sent a jolt of electricity through my skin. I felt it, and I knew he did too. We worked together. He teased me, shaking his head in mock exasperation, but his smile was gentle, likable, and I found myself watching him too closely, memorizing the way his fingers moved, the little crease between his brows when he concentrated. The moments dragged on, thick with something unspoken. When the last cabinet was fixed, we moved to the couch, the exhaustion settling over us in a comfortable way. Cooper curled between us, his warmth against my leg. A forgettable TV show flashed across the screen, but I barely noticed it. My awareness had narrowed, focused on Alex, on the space between us, on the way his arm rested just inches from mine. I could feel his presence like gravity. And then it happened. A shift. A breath. A moment I should have seen coming, but didn't. Alex reached over and placed his hand on mine. Not forcefully, not hesitantly, just there. A quiet, steady pressure that made my heart pound against my ribs. The air left my lungs in a shuddering breath. I should have pulled away. I should have said something, anything. But I didn't. For a fleeting second, I let it happen. And that was the moment everything changed. Then the front door unlocked. I held my breath as Daniel walked in, completely unaware of what I had just done. The air in the room was charged, filled with something unspoken but undeniable. Alex's hand jerked back as if it had been burned, and I stumbled to my feet, my pulse pounding in my ears. My face was burning, not just from the heat of the moment, but from something deeper, shame, fear, the sudden weight of what we had almost done. Daniel, oblivious, kicked off his shoes and tossed his keys onto the small wooden table beside the door. "Hey, I'm home," he said casually, stretching his arms as if he had carried the day's fatigue with him. "What's up?" "Nothing," I blurted out too quickly. my voice rising higher than it should have. Too forced. Too wrong. Alex, calm as ever, rose from his chair, his face an unreadable mask. "I'm going out," he said, his voice even and carefree. But he didn't look at Daniel. Not once. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his attention elsewhere. Maybe he was too tired to notice the tension thickening the air, or maybe he trusted me too much to suspect anything. He leaned down and rubbed behind Cooper's ears, muttering something to the dog. The sight of him, relaxed, completely oblivious, made my stomach twist. For a brief second, I allowed myself to believe that we were safe. That maybe Daniel didn't notice anything. That maybe this moment would fade into the past, never to be spoken of again. That maybe I could erase it from my mind if I really wanted to. But I knew better. Guilt became my shadow in the days that followed, lurking in every quiet moment, in every glance I avoided in the mirror. It clawed at me in the silence of the night, in the way my fingers slid across my phone, resisting the urge to text Alex. I told myself it was nothing, a fleeting moment of weakness, a mistake. But mistakes don't haunt you like this. And then Alex started texting me. Nothing was ever clear. Just the usual texts. "How is Cooper? How was your day?" Little check-ins, superficial, meaningless. But the subtext was there, woven between the words like an unspoken confession. He hadn't forgotten that night, and neither had I. Then Daniel suggested we invite Alex to dinner. I hesitated for a moment, but there was no good reason to refuse. It had been a long time since the three of us had spent time together, and refusing would only lead to questions I wasn't ready to answer. So I forced a smile, nodded as if everything were fine. But inside, my stomach was in knots. The evening started off harmlessly enough. We sat around the table, the conversation light and easy, my heart pounding steadily with guilt. Every glance Alex gave me was heavy with unspoken words, with memories we weren't allowed to acknowledge. Every time Daniel looked at me, warm and trusting, I felt like the worst kind of traitor. After dinner, Daniel excused himself to the kitchen to clean up, refusing my half-hearted offer to help. "You two relax," he said with a smile, disappearing behind the counter. Alex and I moved into the living room, the silence between us stretching too long, too thick. Cooper, as usual, followed faithfully, tail wagging as he hopped onto the couch between us, just as he had that night. That night. Memories hit me like a cold wave. The warmth of Alex's touch, the way his breath caught as he whispered my name, the weight of the moment before we let reason take hold and stepped back from the brink of something irreversible. I stiffened, putting more distance between us. My hands clenched into fists on my thighs, my nails digging crescents into my palms. Cooper, oblivious, settled comfortably between us, his head resting on Alex's thigh. "I'll help Daniel in the kitchen," I blurted out. Alex didn't try to stop me. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, his expression unreadable, his hands hanging limply on his knees. As I walked away, I felt his gaze on my back, heavy and knowing, and filled with everything we hadn't said. The kitchen smelled of fresh citrus and soap as Daniel hummed softly, drying the last of the dishes. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. He looked so peaceful, so happy, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. And in that moment, the guilt became unbearable. I gripped the edge of the counter, keeping my balance. The words clawed at my throat, desperate to escape, but fear held them captive. To confess would mean destruction. It would mean shattering the peaceful happiness we had built, leaving nothing but ruin in its wake. "Hey, can I talk to you?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. Daniel turned, his blue eyes instantly clouded with concern. Of course. What's wrong? I hesitated. This was the moment. The moment of truth. If I said it now, if I said it all, there would be no turning back. But looking into his expectant eyes, I realized I couldn't. Nothing. I lied, forcing a masked smile. Work's just stressful. His shoulders relaxed as he pulled me into his arms. The warmth of his arms should have been comforting, but instead it only made the guilt feel more suffocating. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? He whispered into my hair. I nodded into his chest, but inside, I was falling apart. I knew I had to end this. The next day, I texted Alex. We need to talk. This has to end. The seconds felt like hours as I waited for his reply. When it finally came, his reply was short, direct. I see. When can I meet you? I should have suggested a coffee shop, somewhere neutral and safe. But when he asked if he could come when Daniel was away, I hesitated, and then, against my better judgment, I said yes. The knock came too soon. Cooper, our golden retriever, bounded toward him, wagging his tail, oblivious to the rising tension in the air. I hesitated a heartbeat before opening the door. Alex stood there, hands in his coat pockets, his expression unreadable. The sight made me uneasy. This was a mistake. I should never have let things get this far. Come in, I said, stepping aside. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. He stepped in, his eyes scanning the familiar space before settling on me. I don't want to lose you, he said softly. I swallowed. Alex, this isn't fair. To any of us. I know, he admitted, but that doesn't change how I feel. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stand my ground. It has to end. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unbearable. Then, before I could say another word, the sound of the front door unlocking sent me into a panic. Daniel had come home early. My heart pounded against my ribs as the door opened. Footsteps echoed in the entryway. Hey, Daniel's voice trailed off as he stepped into the living room, his eyes on Alex. The air was thick with unspoken words, unasked questions. And in that moment I knew this wasn't just a dangerous decision. This was the beginning of the end.